This is Bob Siegel. So, you'd like to believe in God, but you wonder if God created everything, does that also include swamps? If so, why did God create swamps? Well, my friend, if you're talking about natural swamps and its creepy, freaky inhabitants such as alligators, the answer would probably have something to do with our ecosystem. But if you're talking about the swamp in Washington, D.C., the one Donald Trump promised to drain, well, this swamp is man-made, not God-made. Speaking of the swamp and that intelligence memo which blew the lid off of the place, how fitting that the memo was released on Groundhog Day. Not early enough on Groundhog Day. I was rooting for the top of the morning. For a while, I was hoping Punxsutawney Phil would not only read The Shadow, but also read that intelligence memo, which all week long we kept hearing was going to be released any day now, any day. When Phil predicted 6 more weeks of winter but said nothing about the memo, I figured the Democrats got to him. That same Democratic Congress which rushed to the exit door after President Trump's State of the Union speech. Actually, I did like that rush to the door. Let me tell you why. Because I believe in a kind of prophecy, a lot of which is found in the Bible, a kind of prophecy called typology. Typology is where a small event is similar or analogous to a major future event. So when the Democrats rushed to get out of the Capitol building chamber, I was just hoping that was a preview of things to come following the midterm elections. Or maybe it was former FBI Director James Comey who got to Punxsutawney Phil. Comey, you may recall, had tweeted that the memo should not be released. I guess he would know all about keeping a memo a secret. For myself, I was anxious to see this thing released before the FBI found some deep state judge to order that the memo not be released. Anyway, Punxsutawney Phil's silence notwithstanding, the memo did finally make its way to the public later in the day, and still on Groundhog Day. And yes, it was so very fitting to see it released on Groundhog Day. Like the Bill Murray movie, the Dems and mainstream media are still waking up repeatedly on the same morning. Nothing new in the news for any of them because they are stuck in time. For them, the story is still Trump colluding with the Russians. Now, don't get me wrong. There was collusion. Absolutely, there was collusion. But we now know that the ones doing the colluding were the Hillary campaign, the FBI, and the Obama Justice Department. They were colluding against candidate Trump, and they did get some help from Russia in the process. But this is not what they plan to sell American citizens. Their narrative is still the culpability of Donald Trump. Their latest so-called evidence is that the FBI called upon Trump not to release the memo. Oh, golly, the FBI didn't want this declassified, the honest, unbiased, middle-of-the-road, uncompromising FBI? Well, shucks. I guess that should have settled the matter and ended it once and for all. Supposedly, the mere act of refusal from President Trump toward this stellar organization compromises our security even more. The rest of us are supposed to be too stupid to understand why a memo with damning evidence against the FBI would be resisted by the FBI. Go figure. Happy belated Groundhog Day. I can hear Sonny and Cher singing right now. And as I wish you a happy Groundhog Day, we also honor Super Bowl Sunday today. And we welcome those who, instead of watching the Super Bowl, are listening to my program. Welcome, both of you. I know I did that same gag last year. I do it every year. It never gets old. But today, to celebrate the gag with me, a man who really did give up the Super Bowl to join me. Say hello to rotating co-host Jim Berrier.
Hi, Bob. And I first want to respond. I love your piece about Punxsutawney Phil, who, what I said, turned out to be a mole, not a groundhog, and he's working with the Russians.
That's right. So, fortunately, the memo got out later that day anyway.
Well, it's just so funny how they'll flip-flop on what they want to happen, and then they say, no, we can't do this, we want to release, we don't want to release it, and it's a national security threat. And yeah,
they weren't having trouble leaking all kinds of secrets for the last year, but boy.
Yeah.
And then what do you love about the mainstream media? We have this movie that's up for the Academy Award, The Post, about the time when they blew the lid off of the Pentagon Papers, and they were going to let the government throw them in jail, and then all of a sudden they're so concerned about government security. These same people that have been bad-mouthing police officers for the last 3 years, and now all of a sudden there's this intense love for the FBI. It's just it would be funny if it wasn't so sad.
Yeah, it really it's the height of illogic, and what, of course, Mr. Spock would say, whoever accused the humans, much less the government, much less the FBI, of being logical. So,
we could use a Vulcan or two these days.
Well, we could. But instead what we have is a lot of very emotional beings, and sadly, a lot of people in the public who are easily led by their emotions. But let's move on. And I want to say a couple of things before we get into the sports stuff. And folks, because it's Super Bowl Sunday, we're going to talk about politics in sports, and which I realize is kind of an odd thing to do, because if you're really a big sports fanatic, you're probably watching the Super Bowl with the sound turned down while you listen to the Bob Siegel Show.
I'm sure that's exactly how they're doing it. They may be watching the Super Bowl, but they're making sure my show is on at the same time.
Well, I am. But I wanted to get your take, not only about the things you've already addressed, but we did a show last month, and we kind of gave our own State of the Union, and we talked about how we felt the first year of the Trump presidency went. But what did you think of the State of the Union address?
I thought it was phenomenal, and it was hard for people to deny that it was phenomenal, because unlike when he tweets or goes out on the stump, he was scripted. He's very good when he was scripted, and so that was their complaint. He was honestly actually on a teleprompter, as if Obama was never on the teleprompter. Obama wouldn't have known how to sneeze if he didn't have that teleprompter on.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you've seen the clips. What happens when the teleprompter goes out, and he suddenly became a blubbering idiot.
And when he's reading off of it, calling them Navy corpsmen instead of Navy corpsmen. I mean, it was so. Yeah, and I felt that everything that Trump said was very heartfelt, and yet, you got to hand it to him for being so politically astute, because every family and every hero that he had stand up. Yep. And I know they always do that, but boy, it really fit this time. And I remember when he started talking about the MS-13 gang, and you could hear the Democrats starting to boo, and then all of a sudden he switches over to an African-American family, two African-American families whose daughters had been murdered by them, and they had to calm it down fast. I think if Trump were really smart, so he always keeps getting accused of racism by people who don't really believe it. These were people, after all, who palled around with him for years. If you look at his philanthropy record, the people, the organizations he's given money to, the man's not a racist. They know he's not a racist. They never accused him of being a racist until he started running for president as Republican. However, what Trump ought to do is the two biggest things he gets flack about are border and racism. So all he ought to do is keep talking about how illegal immigration is putting African Americans out of work. And they won't have anything to say. Now, they'll say something, but they'll sound stupid when they say it.
And that's different how?
From what they're doing now. Well, what's different is that maybe some of the independents in the middle will start waking up. It's not going to change anything that the Democrats do. They will not stray from their talking points. Yeah. They're too beholding now to far left-wing Marxist groups. There's just nothing they can do. They're pushing themselves so left, they're just going to fall off the cliff. Speaking
of that, and people who are seem to sound stupid, one of the reactions that I read after the State of the Union address was one of our favorites, Maxine Waters. I know you're a big fan.
Yes, just the wit and the intelligence that comes from that Ivy Tower lady.
Lecturing executives at a congressional hearing about oil said, guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal would be about socializing, would be about basically taking over and the government running your companies. So her response to the State of the Union message was, whenever Trump appears on TV, there should be a disclaimer first that says, this may not be suitable for children.
Yeah, or maybe there should be a disclaimer when she talks that says this is suitable for blithering idiots. You know,
I'm thinking if a Republican ever said there needs to be a disclaimer before a particular Democratic candidate or office holder speaks, they would say that's fascism, that's censoring, that's mind control, that's trying to manipulate young children. But she says, no, children shouldn't be listening to Donald Trump. Why? Because he disagrees with me.
Right, and yet these children can be indoctrinated in their classrooms about Donald Trump and about President Obama the 8 years before. You know, what's interesting is that even Congresswoman Waters had difficulty not admitting that he gave a good speech because she had to get up and say, one good speech doesn't mean he's presidential. So if you read between the lines of that, she's pretty much reluctantly admitting that it was a good speech. Yeah,
there was nothing to criticize. Now, I did notice there was one real big fan in the audience, and that was Nancy Pelosi, who's right up there with Maxine, maybe even worse. You know, she didn't seem to like the things that Donald had to
the new
say.
Marie Antoinette saying that $1,000 kickback from your company is just crumbs.
Crumbs.
I'm sure the many mansions she owns, this billionaire woman that's always preaching against the rich, I'm sure that to her, $1,000 is crumbs. But to a lot of Americans, that's a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
And a lot of money they haven't had for a long time.
It'd be a lot of money to my kids who are just fighting to make ends meet from month to month.
Well, so, I heard Debbie Wasserman Schultz talking about some kickback on a Democratic plan where people were going to get an extra $40. The extra $40 was great, but $1,000 from Trump, those are crumbs. Okay, Jim, hold with me. We'll be right back.
We don't know, won't find out till we grow. Well, I don't know if all that's true. You got me, baby, I got you. I got you, babe. I got you, babe.
As if you haven't figured it out by now, Bob is mildly opinionated about the ultimate issues of life. But Bob also respects the opinions of others. To offer your own viewpoint or to challenge Bob with a thought-provoking question, give us a call at 1-888-344-1170, 1-888-344-1170. You can also reach Bob through Facebook, Twitter, or questions@bobsiegel.net. When you trust the care of your children to others, it's comforting to know they share the same Christian values, that what you teach your children at home is also taught in their preschool environment. Wisdom Works Christian Preschool is an all-inclusive preschool where the staff ministers to all children of all abilities, including children with special needs, through a curriculum developed by the owners and designed for the preschool-age child 3 to 5. During these preschool years, your children will make important developmental gains, as well as social and emotional development that'll be the foundation for their overall success in life. Wisdom Works Christian Preschool is a state-licensed, Bible-believing, Bible-teaching preschool and a nonprofit 501c3 organization. Contact us now at wisdomworkschristianpreschool.com and secure a space for your preschooler. wisdomworkschristianpreschool.com or call 619-440-1044. 619-440-1044. Wisdom Works Christian Preschool.
Welcome back to 1170 The Answer. I'm your host, Bob Siegel, co-hosting with me today all the way from San Antonio, Texas. Say hello again to Jim Berrier.
Okay, first of all, thanks for going out with the song "I Got You, Babe" by Sonny and Cher to remind us of Groundhog Day.
We couldn't
Good morning,
resist.
campers. Okay,
I love that movie. I hate that song. No fan of Sonny and Cher, but boy, whenever I hear this song now, I think about the movie. So in a way, it's been kind of grandfather clause.
They were interesting. They were entertaining. And speaking of entertainment, folks, we've talked quite a bit about movies in Hollywood, and certainly we've really addressed the lopsided politics in Hollywood. That's always a topic and something we're aware of. But I'd like to remind listeners that the sports world in our nation, in our culture, really is just an entertainment industry. That's really what it is. You have movie stars that make $20 million to do a film, and you've got professional athletes that make $20 million a year to play a game.
And then when they start protesting to talk about what a bad country we are, and they become multimillionaires, obviously the country wasn't too bad to them. Yeah.
So we're going to address that a little bit now. And really what triggered this, it started back in 2016. NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, at the time with the San Francisco 49ers, in a preseason game. It wasn't even a season game, so there wasn't a lot of people watching, but he decided to make a statement, so he remained seated during the national anthem. And this caused no small stir. And it was controversial, and there was a lot of talk, and there were people who were upset. I found it quite ironic. When I talked about it, I said, I think it's funny that this guy's being made a hero when Tim Tebow would take a knee in prayer, and he was basically run out of the league for doing that.
Yeah, we were told that sports is not the place to take those kinds of stands. Yeah. So then why is it the place for Kaepernick? No, and you follow sports way more than me. I'm not even in the same stratosphere, but correct me if I'm mistaken. Wasn't Kaepernick having a pretty bad year anyway? And a lot of people think he may have done this just to bring attention to himself and jumpstart his career, like these were disingenuous motives for taking a knee?
Well, he certainly got a lot more attention as a result of this. The fact is, his record as a starting quarterback, he has a losing record. He's lost more games than he's won as a starter in season games, regular season games. And so, he really wasn't that great of a quarterback. He came into the league and he kind of had a lot of flash, and he is a flashy player, and I enjoyed him as a player when he first came on, but as happens in sports, a guy can come out and the rest of the team starts studying, and they figure him out, and he wasn't as flashy. It didn't take too long for them to figure him out. So he wasn't really one of the upper crust quarterbacks in the league. But he did this thing, I think, I don't know. I've never talked to him. I've only heard his statements. I'm not sure what he was trying to work out. His statement about it, when he was questioned about it, he said, I'm not going to stand up and show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color.
Yeah, so he's black. How oppressed is he when he's become a millionaire? This is just insane.
Oh, no, he's totally oppressed. He was adopted by white parents who were quite wealthy and then got paid millions to play a sport. Yeah, so he was doing this sacrificially on behalf of the oppressed people.
Well, and didn't he have statements on his shoes about cops being pigs, something to that effect?
Yeah. There was all of that stuff, and so he alienated a lot of people. Law enforcement people were really not happy about it, and it was really kind of playing off of the Black Lives Matter thing, and that, I think, what inspired him, if inspiration is the right word, I'm not sure.
And Black Lives Matter was started off of a false accusation by a policeman who was even exonerated by Obama's Justice Department, which was doing everything they could to find something on him, and on a grand jury, exonerated by black eyewitnesses who took the side of the police officer, and yet we come up with this hands up, don't shoot. Yeah. And the problem with titles like Black Lives Matter, the left is really good at making up these titles because they become innocuous titles. Who wants to say that black lives don't matter or that any lives don't matter? So it's almost like if you criticize the organization, you're criticizing the title. But they're not worthy of that title. it's a heinous organization. And if people would look at what they do and what they really stand for, as opposed to what they call themselves, they would come to a completely different conclusion.
Yeah, and in the last 8 or 9 years, the race card has been so quick to be played by anybody who needs to justify themselves or attack someone else. You just play the race card, and then you're going to win, because no one wants to be a racist or to have any appearance of being a racist, and so people back down really quick when you play that card.
Well, yeah, that's why people were afraid to ever criticize Obama, because if you were against Obama, you were against the first African-American president. And this is the party that's always accusing conservatives of not being nuanced enough. And yet they have these simplistic A or B answers. Either you love Obama or you're a racist. We couldn't possibly be objecting to some of his policies. And then they don't have a way of explaining why many black people did not vote for Obama or support him. They can't call them racist, but they're just hoping people are too stupid to think about the subtleties of this.
Well, and it's again, and I said earlier in the show, the problem is people are much more easily manipulated emotionally. It doesn't have anything to do with logic. People don't look at the facts. They don't study. They hear somebody say something that stirs their emotions or causes fear or causes some sort of a guilt complex. And so too many people are led that way. So that's what this stuff was about. And I think Colin possibly could be a victim of that type of thing. I think he was working more out of emotions and not logic and didn't look at facts. But that's what he did, and that started a whole wave. And so then other players started kneeling. A few weeks later, he started kneeling instead of sitting, but it was for the same reason. And other players in the league started to take sides with him. And then you had some owners and coaches saying, if you don't stand the national anthem, you're not going to play. And it split the league, split the nation, split the fan base, and we'll be back.
We'll be right back. You're listening to The Bob Siegel Show. Joining me today, Jim Berrier, talking a little bit about the Super Bowl, but the broader related question this past year, all the politics that has gotten into football. Jim, welcome back to our program.
All right, thanks. Now, we're talking about Colin Kaepernick and then his demonstration, and then how other players began to join him, and other players took the opposite stand, and it really caused a rift. I mean, and believe it or not, President Trump got involved and tweeted and said that players who don't stand during the national anthem should be fired. This shouldn't surprise anyone, because Donald had a TV show of his own, and that was the tagline, "You're fired." Yeah,
I wish he'd fire half of Washington right now.
Well, I think if it was in his power to do so legally, he would.
Some of them are in his power. It's just politically not being advised to him. But I think people are going to criticize him politically no matter what he does. I think he should just go for it personally.
Well, I do too. And actually, he has dismissed, within the first year, he dismissed an awful lot of people because, they weren't in agreement or didn't want to work with him. And so I think he's doing what he can. And we've only had 1 year. I think this next year is really important. And by the time you get to his fourth year, then it's an election year and nobody does anything. But I think we've had a good start, and we'll see what happens. So back to the sports. So we have this rift that happened, and where it really started to become important to anybody in that industry is the TV ratings, because it is a business. And the first year after he did this, so that would be the season of 2016, ratings dropped 14%. That's huge. in television. 14% for NFL games.
And yet the owners are still being wusses. I know that originally they were knuckling down on them, but then they let up.
Well,
so evidently being politically correct is more important to them even than ratings.
Yeah. Well, but a lot of them they had meetings, they talked with players, and they tried to, figure out things. And so some of the players started finding other ways to show solidarity, but to not disrespect the flag or the national anthem. And they were really torn because a lot of the players had parents who were veterans, some veterans themselves. And so they were trying to say, well, we don't like the injustice in America, but we honor the people who fight for our freedom. And they really got caught in a thing there. And by the way, I need to say this in case anybody misunderstands. I do believe in freedom of speech. I believe a person has a right to their opinion and a right to express that. But I think there are sometimes cases like this one where it was done poorly and in the wrong way. And so what it did was it sent messages to people that really they were unhappy with. And so in 2016, ratings dropped 14%. This past season, the 2017 NFL season, dropped almost another 10%, 9 point something, nearly another 10%. And so the ratings are in the tank. And this starts to hurt because people who advertise during your game on the networks and pay big, big bucks because they want everyone to see their commercials start to get hesitant. And they say, you know what? I don't think I want to buy what you're selling. And so it's really, they've taken a hit in the pocketbook, and that's really, whether you like it or not, that's how you get stuff done. That's what gets things accomplished often, is if you can show that there's going to be a huge impact economically. I sound like a Marxist, but I'm not.
No. Well, and we do want to, not at all, but we do want to point out freedom of speech is from the government. The government cannot go and arrest somebody because they don't want to stand up for the flag or the national anthem.
No.
But when a football player signs a contract with a league or a team, and there are certain rules, and the rules in many of the cases at least were you will stand for the national anthem, the owners do have a right to fire them. And that's not a freedom of speech issue because that's not the government arresting them. That's the owners saying, you didn't honor our agreement, you're fired.
Yeah, and there are owners and there are head coaches that did just that. And they called team meetings and said, look, guys, you can believe what you want and you can have your opinions, but when it comes to that moment, you're going to respect the national anthem and the flag, or you're not going to play on this team. And so I appreciate owners and coaches who had the what it takes to take that kind of a stand. Now, they may be in the minority at this point, but I think the more the ratings continue to fall, then the more it's going to come from up on top. And the commissioner is already in a quandary, but ultimately it's going to get down to the pocketbook. And the players are too dumb to realize that they're biting the hand that feeds them.
They are, and again, I think it's very disingenuous. If Kaepernick and the rest of them really had courage and moral fortitude and wanted to take a stand for Black Lives Matter, what that statement is supposed to mean, then why don't they take a stand and show solidarity with the families of those two black daughters who were killed by illegal immigrants? How come the Democrats who were sitting on their hands during the State of the Union address didn't stand up for Black Lives Matter in that case? So when it really counts, when they could make a difference, they won't because they don't want to break from their ties and their interest groups and the constituency that they're a part of. So it's very dishonest. Hollywood is like this too. It doesn't take a lot of courage to take stands for the kinds of things Hollywood takes a stand for. What takes courage these days is some conservative in Hollywood that doesn't want to go along with the mainstream. That's what takes courage.
And he doesn't get very many gigs. I want to be very, very careful here, but if you look at the numbers and you look around the league, the NFL has a much higher percentage per capita population of minorities than Hollywood does, in at least in the the primetime movies, the big-time movies are not as nearly dominated. And in football, basketball is the same way. And some of the NBA players started jumping on this bandwagon, too. And so I think there's a sentiment. They feel like they need to do something, but they've been misinformed, or in some cases they're just flat-out hypocritical. But it is a problem that isn't going to go away real soon.
No,
but we are.
It's not. Well, we may be going away soon, but we'll be right back.
Right back.
To have my friend Jim Berrier. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks. Live and Let Die by Sir Paul McCartney, a song which he performed at halftime at the Super Bowl years ago.
Oh, how about that? That I did not know.
Segue?
I just remembered that was part of the James Bond movie, Live and Let Die.
It was, and it was quite a thing to have a Beatle, a former Beatle, do a song which George Martin had a lot to do with it.
Well, they needed the extra hype for the first time that Roger Moore took over, and it wasn't going to be Sean Connery anymore.
Yeah, and that franchise was never the same, unfortunately. So let's see, where were we? We were talking about this, the controversy going on in the NFL, and it started to spread. More players started doing it, and then NBA players started getting in on it. And last year, the NBA champs, the Golden State Warriors, won the title in the National Basketball Association. And traditionally, at least going back to the 80s, teams that won championships, whether in basketball, football, or baseball, were always invited by the president to come to the White House, do some photo ops. And it's an honor. Go to the White House and they'd usually give a jersey to the president or something and have a little thing for winning a championship. Well, the Golden State Warriors boycotted. They declined the invitation, and really led by a couple of key players who I don't like a lot. And I was very disappointed in their coach, Steve Kerr, who went along with it. And they just voted and said, we're not going to the White House. And I thought, now how dumb is that? What is that going to accomplish?
And look at what he's done for African American unemployment is an all-time low. Hispanic unemployment all-time low. That doesn't make any difference to these people. They're
not looking at that. And the truth is, what they're doing is they're listening to the talking heads, and they're buying a bill of goods. They've drank the Kool-Aid. Whatever analogy you want to use. And so they say, well, we hate Trump because he's a racist and a bigot. And not that any of them have a shred of evidence or have ever met the man or can quote anything that would validate that opinion. So they boycotted Trump. They didn't go to the White House, and I thought it was shameful. I thought it was embarrassing, and really kind of sad because you missed out on an opportunity to do something that very few people get to do. So, but that's the kind of thing that's happened. Now I'm going to take a jump here at this point and point out that politics and sports has been a long time tradition. And I was going to do it kind of backwards. Did you ever see the movie Memento?
No, I did not.
Oh, you need to check that film out. It's a crazy film because
when did this movie come out? How long back?
Oh, years ago.
Well, that's why you would know it, Jim, and not me, because of the vast age difference between. I always wanted to ask you, Jim, did your dad fight for the North or the South? I couldn't quite remember that.
Well, he was south of the equator on the island of Guam in World War II. He served in the Navy.
All right. Well, my dad served in the Army Air Force, and I know we're really the same age. So.
Well, in fact, you can go back to World War II. Jesse Owens, a black, or now we have to say African-American athlete, went into the 36 Olympics in Berlin and single-handedly crushed Hitler's Aryan supremacy myth.
Oh, I know. Hitler must have been in a tizzy over this.
Oh, my gosh. And there was a great film about that, really well done movie. But there was politics involved in that whole thing. Now, that had to do as much with racism as nationalism. But Jesse Owens, he at a certain point did not want to go and compete, and there was a lot of pressure on him. It's a great story.
But the difference is in that case, there really was a real, genuine, hideous racism coming out of Nazi Germany. And for people to conflate something like that with today, it's insane.
I get angry when people play the Hitler card.
Because if everybody's Hitler, nobody's Hitler. If everybody's a Nazi and a racist, nobody's a Nazi. It's like the boy who cried wolf, and the real racists are out there, and they get camouflaged now.
Well, anybody that disagrees with me is Hitler. That's what it really boils down to. So then we're going to flash forward a few years. Baseball in America was quite segregated. You had Major League Baseball, and then you had the Negro Leagues, they called them. And we know the story in another great film, the story of Jackie Robinson became the first African-American player to break the color barrier and play in Major League Baseball. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers of the National League in 1947. He was a really good player. This is a sad thing for me. 3 months later, there was a player named Larry Doby. Ever heard of him?
No, I did not know him.
Well, he was the second black player in Major Leagues, and he played for the Cleveland Indians in the American League. And poor Larry Doby never got out of that shadow. He was at least as good a player. His numbers are actually a little better than Jackie Robinson, but because he wasn't the first, he didn't get. They don't have trophies of him. They don't wear his number every year. Poor Larry Doby. He was a great guy, and he went on to manage in baseball and everything. But Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and it was very political. People were really upset, and there was death threats, and there was name calling, and there's a great film about him that came out a few years ago, and Harrison Ford, one of my favorites, played the part of Branch Rickey, the team owner who was the one that pushed this thing, and so that was a very political thing, it started to fix a problem that existed. And then eventually we have players from all races playing in all sports, and so Jackie gets a lot of credit for that. He was the first. But
what's really ironic, Jim? Now that we've integrated teams like the Cleveland Indians, it's not politically correct to use the word Indians. It's like we're never square. We're never finished. There's always something for somebody to complain about.
Oh, you're a step ahead of me every time, Bob.
Okay, well, we'll take that step when we return. You're listening to the beautiful music of Celtic Woman, and I point that out for two reasons. At the moment, it's not against the law to say Celtic, and it's still not against the law to say woman, although we're coming very close in California.
And by the way, when you're referring to the culture up there in the northern part of the UK, and it's Celtic, but when it's a basketball team, it's Celtic. I've never understood that. So
that's true. And now that you mention it, I have heard it pronounced both ways without anybody batting an eyebrow either way.
Yeah. Well, it's always puzzled me. And we also went out at the break to Paul Marriott's Love is Blue, a song of color, so I hope that wasn't a racial thing.
No, I think we can still talk about blue, yeah.
Okay, blue, okay. But, the poor characters in Avatar, they're offended.
But then people can, or they can accuse us of co-opting the black culture because the blues came out of their culture.
Yeah.
It never stops, Jim.
It never stops.
As a couple of white heterosexual males, we should just slit our throats and be done with it.
I know. I feel guilty for being a white male, so at least I'm supposed to. So there has been a long history back to the sports and politics, and it really, some of the most controversial stuff was in my lifetime as a youth. A young fighter named Cassius Clay came on the scene, and he was colorful. He was controversial. He was a great fighter, and he converted to Islam and changed his name to Muhammad Ali because he said that Cassius Clay was his slave name. And so he was very controversial, and he refused induction into the armed services as a conscientious objector, and he was stripped of his title and banned from boxing for 4 years, probably the 4 years from 25 to 29, which would have been the prime of his life. And so people hated him. I remember people hating him. Now they all love him. But he was really controversial.
And, whereas I don't agree with that decision, and I don't believe that Islam is the peaceful religion people try to make it out to be, I will say that at that time, in those days, he was doing something out of the mainstream. So here is an example of a decision where, even though I don't agree with it, I would say that took courage. Now, if somebody was doing that exact same thing today with today's politically correct climate, it would not take courage.
No, and he had death threats against him. And I remember in an interview, he said, "I got nothing against no Viet Cong." He was quite a linguist. And so then that really riled people. And so he paid a price for it. He who knows what his record would have been had he fought for those 4 years, but because he was all, people remember him as the greatest because he kept saying, "I'm the greatest," and he said it for so long that everybody calls him the greatest now.
Yeah, there's another guy today that keeps calling himself great called Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, he's trying to make something great, and I hope he continues.
Well, they were similar in the way they bluntly, crudely talk, both men.
Yeah, that's true. But for some reason, Ali is now a hero and Trump is a villain.
Well, that's because the history book hasn't been closed with Trump. I think years from now, he may be looked at like Winston Churchill and Harry Truman and other men that talked pretty crude and bluntly. Who
also had a lot of critics. Now, and then a couple of years later, in the '68 Olympics, Tommy Smith and John Carlos won the gold and bronze, respectively, in the 200-meter dash. And they stood on the podium and raised their fists with black gloves on in the black power salute. And that was, so the 60s, everything just went crazy. But my point is that politics and sports has always been an issue. And I'm sure somewhere back in the Olympics in Greece, there was probably some athlete who was scorned for something. But in our culture, it certainly has been much like Hollywood, where it's a platform, an individual becomes famous, and they can use that platform to speak their mind, and they have a huge audience. And so it's never going to go away, I think, in our culture with things as they are.
No,
now,
and I don't have a problem with a celebrity
positive.
Speaking his mind. I just wish he wouldn't lose his mind before he speaks it.
Or I wish he had a mind before
had him, or activate the mind before activating the mouth.
Let me tell you a story that I bet you don't know. You're going to know it now. And this is a little bit of a change of pace, but it's a positive story. And this goes back to the Jackie Robinson reference. Once the color barrier was broke, then teams started looking for players. Now, there was a scout in 1948 for the Boston Red Sox. And this scout was down in the South looking for young players, and he was checking out some players. He's actually down there looking at a pitcher. And while he was there, he saw this young kid, 17-year-old ball player, that was just unbelievable. And he went back to the Red Sox and he said, "I found the player that will lead your team to a pennant." And they said, "Tell us about it." And he started telling them. And when they found out he was in the Negro Leagues, they're playing in the semi-pros down there, just a kid. And they found that he was black. They said, we're not having that. We don't do that here. And they said, we're not interested. Now, George Digby believed in his kid so much, he quit his job with the Red Sox. And he started shopping, and he went around from team to team, and he finally went to the New York Giants, who now are in San Francisco. It was then the New York Giants. And he said, "I found a kid that'll lead your team to a pennant." And they took a chance on this player. And this young player came up and was a rookie in 1951. There's a famous play. Bobby Thompson hit a home run to win the pennant for the Giants, and the rookie player on deck was this young player that George Digby believed in so much that he sold his whole life because he believed in Willie Mays.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I grew up on Willie. I grew up on Willie Mays. He was here. And again, see, a lot of times these stands in the past were genuinely heroic. I don't think that's what we're seeing happen today. Well, Jim, thank you for giving up some of the Super Bowl to come on. I do appreciate it.
Had a lot of fun.
All right, my friend. We'll see you next month.
All right.